Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University Night School. I'm Jeff Pearson. I'm here with my co-host, Stephen White. Hello, Stephen. How are you doing this evening?
Pretty good, Jeff. So we're bringing another installment of a new segment that we came up with not too long ago called the Tenant Scam Alert. And we had just sort of discussed that these are issues that come up that we see sort of more often here from a perspective of screening hundreds of tenants every single day. We start to notice these patterns. We start to notice these things that just sort of continue to happen, and landlords who are unaware will inevitably fall for it. And so there's definitely some things out there that landlords should be aware of that tenants, applicants are doing, and again, we're starting to see these patterns. So today we're bringing you one about restricted endorsements on a rent check. So restricted endorsements is, just to give a quick background on it, would be if you were to sign the back of a check, or you put a little note on the back of the check. So let's say I'm the tenant and Jeff, you're the landlord, and I'm going to pay you $500. And just this, I'll give you the simplest explanation for it. The rent is $700 and I write you a check for $500. And even though you and I may have a verbal agreement that I'm going to pay you the other $200 next week or whatever the case is, if I put a restricted endorsement on that check on the back of it saying something to the effect of, by cashing this check constitutes payment in full, something as simple as that, the minute you sign that and cash that, you've agreed to it. And so that the rest of that money, that $200, whatever, regardless of the agreement that we may have had verbally, I no longer owe, because you just cashed that in agreeing that now we're square, and we're all set. So this happens a lot of times when landlords try to make arrangements to deal with damages. And it certainly happens, with rent checks. But usually it's when they're trying to pay money that's in arrears. And, it throws the whole routine off. So the landlord's no longer getting that check on the first. They're sort of getting the checks here and there. And it's a lot easier to slide something like that through. And especially for the landlords that literally rubber stamp their endorsement, or they have let's say an office manager or somebody else that's doing it. Maybe you're not even the person that's signing the checks. We've talked about this before in the past too, where now there's just all this technology out there as well in dealing with checks. So this stuff is a lot of times a lot easier to slide through the cracks than it used to be.
Right. Now, the interesting thing when you talk about technology, you're saying somebody can turn the check over right on the back, payment in full. But if somebody writes me a check and I use my phone, I take a picture of the front of the check and I send it to the bank, there's no copy of what's on the back of that check.
Exactly. And you processed it, as if you endorsed it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if push comes to shove and it goes to court and a judge looks at it and you're still in possession of that original check and it's never went back into the tenant's hands, you're holding all the evidence right there that tenant had put the restricted endorsement on there. That was the agreed, the agreement that obviously the landlord should have or must have been aware of if he agreed to deposit and cash that check.
Yes. But if you put it through using technology, you take a picture of it, you send it to the bank, and you shred the checks, and don't even turn them over to look at what's on the back.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's probably the best way to get around that for sure.
Yep. But if you were asked in a court of law, was that on there? You would have to tell the truth. So my thought would be, if you're even slightly concerned about it, never look at the back of the check, and always destroy the check after you send the picture to the bank and get clearance.
Yep. And if you're doing it the old fashioned way, if you're still collecting checks, which I know a lot of landlords are for sure.
Yeah.
You're still collecting checks, and you do run into this situation, the right thing to do is to not cash the check.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Address the situation immediately. Hey, what's this on there? I'm not accepting this. And again, coming from the collection and credit background that I have, we used to get these all the time in the mail, all the time. Somebody would have, $1,000 on past due rent that they would owe, and they would try and pull a fast one on us, and they'd send us 500, and right on the back, cashing this constitutes payment in full. And if we were to do that, it would, of course, negate the rest of the $500 that was owed, and that would be payment in full. So we used to just take a big red marker and write not accepted, and write them a little note saying, you put a restricted endorsement on here, that's not going to fly. And then send it back to them. We can't touch it. We can't cash it, because the minute we do that, we're now agreeing to your terms that you had written on there.
And it's a tough thing for a landlord, because you might have been really hounding this person. It's been weeks, and you finally you caught them in the driveway or whatever, and they gave you this check, or they sent it in the mail, and to stop and tell them, no, I won't accept this. It's a tough thing to do.
Yeah.
But you're putting yourself in a bad situation if you accept it. So one, look at both sides of the check when you receive a check, especially if it's a problem tenant. And like you said, don't accept it. Make sure you're aware of it up front and don't accept it.
Right. Now here's one good exception that a landlord may run into. If you're aware of it or suggest it to a tenant, let's say, the tenant has fought you on some damages back and forth, and you guys, it's a mutual agreement, and you say, okay, fine, you know what? I'll take the 500 versus the 1,000. We'll call it a settlement if you can pay me today, or whatever the situation is. If you can write that check today, and let's say that person might say, well, I want it in writing. That restricted endorsement then serves a different purpose, where that is providing it in writing. So you might be able to tell that tenant and say, you know what, put a restricted endorsement on the back of it, and there's the legal documentation that we need. Real simple sentence on the back: by cashing this, the debt is paid in full, or this is being agreed as paid in full, and that will usually suffice as a settlement letter, for lack of better words, because really that's what it is. You're agreeing, you're agreeing on a lesser amount, and both parties are obviously in agreement if you're endorsing it. And it could save you some time having to write up, open up Word and come up with a settlement letter from scratch and get both signatures and everything on it. This could be a nice, real quick solution. And just, especially if you're standing in front of them or something, you're there on site. If they're going to write it, you're willing to make a deal, just tell them, flip it over, throw a restricted endorsement on the back, and we're done here.
Right. Now, I would, in that situation, when I get back home or back to the office, I would send them an email follow-up saying, this is pertaining to our conversation earlier today. I want to establish some documentation of our conversation, and just so that we're both in agreement, this is what we agreed to. You wrote it on the back of the check, and we're considering this a done deal. And email it to them. You have the check. You have the proof that that's what they said. But again, as part of being a business person and running this as a business, send them the email so that they have a copy of it for their records as well.
Right. And it's a good reminder that you understand the, your side of it. And I think that's putting anything to rest there for sure. So it's definitely good advice there. Throw the extra line of communication out there and just confirm everything.
Well, perfect, Stephen. I think that wraps up another evening of Night School. I look forward to talking with you tomorrow evening.
All right. Great. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University. And remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at thementorimpact.com.